Yeah.
Welcome, everyone. This is the third session of a series that the Boise Center and the Center for Christian Jewish Learning have been sponsoring this semester, seeking to educate the educators about the experience of first-gen students, especially at Boston College, so that we can have tools and knowledge of how to be more effective in our support of this community of students. Our speaker today is Dacia Gentilella, who is the Assistant Director of Outreach and Support for the Learning to Learn program at Boston College. Learning to Learn supports first-gen and low-income students to find success at Boston College and beyond. She also coordinates and teaches one section of the Applications of Learning Theory 3-credit course offered to first and second year students as an opportunity to learn academic skills and approaches to college level work. She also teaches cornerstone and capstone classes focused on mindful success for first year and senior students. In addition, Dacia teaches writing and literature in the Department of English and serves as a mentor to graduate students in the writing corps. So this sounds like an enormously full plate, but you were recommended so highly to us as the person to come and speak to all of us about the ways to support that faculty can be working in support of first gen and other low income students at Boston College. So Dacia, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. Thanks very much. Hi, everybody, and thanks for the great introduction. And there's also a handout that's out and about that you'll be able to access. So I'm going to talk very briefly. I think you've really covered the Learning to Learn program. I'm going to say a few other things, and then I'm going to jump right into assisting first-gen students. And some other things that we do in terms of Learning to Learn is that might be informational for people teaching or working with first-gen students is there's a living learning community floor now for Learning to Learn students. So if you're not familiar with that, a community of students living together with in the dorms with a particular focus and programming around that focus. There's a multicultural floor that a lot of first-gen students also live on campus. As you might imagine, it makes they're very attracted to that particular floor because of the programming associated with it, and because so many first-gen students are also AHANA students, and they're interested in that link of the multicultural atmosphere there. So there's a couple. So that's another thing. So we have a Learning to Learn LLC. We don't run the multicultural floor, but a lot of our students go there. We have a group called DOP and a group called Sisters Let's Talk that provides support for students on a weekly basis. They meet for discussions. They sometimes meet together. One is for individuals identifying as male, and one is for individuals identifying as female. We have a first-gen club. We have a first-gen advisory council that put on events on campus. And part of the Learning to Learn program also that people may have heard of but not know it's associated with us is the Ronald Mcnair program, which supports first-gen students and underrepresented students who are interested in graduate study. So that particular program pairs them with a faculty mentor, and they do research with that mentor. They have a summer research course, and they have a symposium, and they also visit graduate schools around the country. Lately it's been Zoom, but hopefully it'll be in person again at some point. So those are some of the things that we do through the Learning to Learn office. I think my main point here today is that first-gen students are like other college students. They have the worries, the imposter syndrome. They have all the things we see in our students. They really want to succeed. They're overwhelmed by a lack of time management when they get to campus. They try to put on a good face, And inside they're uncertain. I would say, you know, teaching all the classes that I teach, because they're not all for first gen students, that's what we see from our students when they arrive at Boston College. What's, if I'm sort of broadly generalizing, but I think if you take all of those concerns and you add often a lack of funding, personal lack of funding, and you magnify all the other things that I just mentioned, that's often the life of a first gen student. So if some students come to BC wondering if it was a mistake that they were admitted, often first gen students feel that even more strongly. If they're uncertain about their academics, against first gen students may have come, not always, may have come from schools that have prepared them to succeed at Boston College, but maybe a little less so in some of the academics that they've had. And one major thing that often first gen students show up with is a lack of understanding of the unspoken rules of how college works. And so I'm gonna reference some of the things that I put in the handout are resources, and a lot of the work of, I'm sure a lot of people have heard of him, Anthony Jack from Harvard, who wrote The Privileged Poor, How Elite Colleges Are Failing Disadvantaged Students. A lot of students, because BC is a fairly well-off campus, a lot of students who come to BC have gone to boarding school or gone to high schools that have a boarding school feel to them, even if they're not boarding school, where teachers are available to them to stop in for office hours and talk to them, and students are used to talking to teachers one-on-one about their work, about how they're feeling about school, all of those things. A lot of our first gen students have never had that experience. They've never had teachers who just sat in an office and waited for them to come, and who then learned what to do when you sit and you talk to a faculty member, you talk to your teacher, and you can share with them your worries about the course, your worries about academics in general. A lot of our students come from schools with very small guidance departments. A lot of our first gen schools don't have guidance departments, pretty much. If you're going to a teacher, it's more that you're in trouble or you found a mentor and you go back to that person. But the idea of coming to college and saying, and even look, and Anthony Jack talks about this, looking at a syllabus and saying, oh, office hours, they're Monday from 4 to 5 in the afternoon. What are office hours? Right. And I listened to Anthony Jack when he came to campus some years ago, and here I'd been teaching for all of these years and making my syllabus and trying to be so precise about everything. And when he said that, I thought, oh, I'm missing a huge layer here. And so often students who go to boarding school know what an office hour is. They know what to do, know what's expected, and they're not as afraid as our students often are. We've had students say, and Anthony Jack had this experience too, office hours, oh, that must be when the teachers are doing their own work and they don't want to be bothered. So this is the kind of gap that we're talking about. So we've got highly motivated, highly successful students coming here and not understanding the undercurrents. First gen students also feel a lot of extra pressure to do well. And because often they're carrying their entire family with them, and their family, especially low income students, is sacrificing so much to even let the student come to college, even if the student gets a great financial aid package here, which BC is very good about financial aid packages for their students, I will say. And however, you may be taking away earning power for a family when a student comes here. You may be taking away someone who's looking after the kids while the parents are at work. In other words, they're carrying all of that on their back, and that's extra pressure. You know, I'm here, so now I've really got to do well because I know they're really depending on me now, and they've let me come lovingly. And also, when I leave Boston College, I need to earn money. I need to earn real money. And that's the pressure that they walk around with, never mind the academics, and to try to find your way as a first-gen student. There's around 1,000 first-gen students at Boston College at any one time out of the total amount of students at Boston College. So they're already trying to make their way. And certainly we have programs like BC First, which is a freshman year summer program where students are selected to come who are first gen, and they get to meet each other and form a group and have some support systems with each other and with our office. BAIC has OTE, Options Through Education, which does the same thing, plus has classes that the students are taking so they can get a leg up on the amount of credits they have even starting their first year. So we have those programs on campus where students can meet each other ahead of time and have a lot in common. But then when September comes and the campus fills, it's startling for our students. And they go through orientation with students who are talking about their summer homes and their winter homes and what they were doing, and they had to come back from Europe in order to do orientation. Some are trying to, last couple of years, zoom in from wherever they are for orientation. And our students, for the most part, do not have that kind of money, and they're listening to this. And so they have their, let's say, their summer group, if they're fortunate enough to get in one of those two programs. And however, if you're going to, apparently orientation is going to be in person again this summer. So when they come to campus and they have orientation, they're going to be rooming with whomever who's talking about these things. And they're going to suddenly have this sense of, oh, there's a lot of other levels of understanding and access that I've never had. So it can be really shocking. Students can be very excited about their first year of college, and then often after orientation, they come out, no fault of orientation, I'm saying they come out and they realize, oh, wait a minute. They just look at what their roommate is wearing. You know, it's spoken and unspoken. Financial literacy and first gen students is a huge challenge. Most of our students fill out their own FAFSAs every year, and they get assistance, hopefully, from people, and certainly once they get here, we try to assist them, and they have their financial aid advisors, but often they have difficulty getting their parents to understand FAFSA well enough, especially if there's a language barrier, and also getting the documentation that they need to fill out their forms and get their documentation in for their loans. So there's another pressure that they're dealing with. And often we have students who are locked out of spring registration because they haven't gotten in all their paperwork. And that's been happening the last number of weeks. So they're on hold. There's holds for this and there's holds for that. And often it's because they don't have the paperwork in and they can't access it. Another thing to keep in mind is that white students are first gen students too. And that I'm a first gen student, you know, so that's something that people seem to be unaware of here at BC. And so that's another thing to think about. When we all make assumptions, it's how we get along in the world. And, you know, hopefully we keep them to ourselves until we figure out if they're accurate. But those are some assumptions that are made as well, that if you're Caucasian, you couldn't possibly be a first gen or a low income student. It's an interesting concept here at BC. Another book that I would recommend people look at is, in addition to Anthony Jacks, is by Alfred Lubrano, and it's called Limbo: Blue Collar Roots, White Collar Dreams. It's a really fabulous, I think, book about low-income first-gen students leaving home to go to college. And it talks a lot about unrealistic expectations of family members, the strain of being needed at home, losing a sense of who you are when you feel like, now I don't feel at home anymore because I've been changed somehow by college, but I still don't feel comfortable in college. So that concept of being stuck between two places, but now no longer feeling like you belong in either one, I would say it's really great reading. And I use it in my capstone course for seniors. It's a capstone for first gen students. I always teach it in the spring, right before they're about to go off to whatever they're going to do next. And I can tell you that all the things that I've mentioned about first year students coming in, these students are still carrying with them. They're graduating from Boston College and they still don't feel like they're prepared as well as other students to go out into the world. They are keenly worried about, am I going to earn enough money in whatever I've either been chosen to do because they've interviewed and they've already got jobs waiting for them, or they don't have a position yet and they're very nervous about that. It's as if they've gone right back to senior year of high school and they're about to go to college, or perhaps the first couple months of first year of college. And it all comes up all over again. They have a hard time accepting their capabilities during the shift of, excuse me, of graduating. The same thing all comes back. And we read Limbo, we read some Anthony Jack almost as a reminder, remember, you've done this before, you've got this, but just, it always amazes me the amount of students who have jobs waiting who still feel like they've made a mistake. It's across schools. So, I think one of the major keys to helping first gen students in your classes or first gen students that you're working with is to normalize the struggle, to share your struggles with them, to say, I talk with all my students, frankly, about, I spent a lot of time my freshman year as a first gen student, only child. I had no idea what I was doing. And so I spent a lot of time socializing, and I didn't even drink. I was just socializing and got really great at playing the guitar, because my way of dealing with all the stressors, excuse me, that's better, and the unknowns was to hide in things, and hanging out with people, playing the guitar. All of that is what a lot of first gen students will do. And because you feel uncomfortable, you sort of go underground. So if teachers can explain to students what the struggles are, the struggles they had. So I share those those stories with my students, and they usually look shocked. But the understanding that, yes, this is really hard. And this is where I struggle. This is where I still struggle. I had, and telling your whole class this. Don't, not looking for, oh, who might I share this with, but telling them all these things so they have an understanding that this is normal. This is okay. They're being told to find your joy, and I'm all about that with my students, but it's hard to find your joy when you're really certain someone's going to figure who you are out, know that you're incapable, and toss you. And so the idea of, we all feel that way, we've all done those things, putting out to an entire class, books are really expensive. If you can't afford your books, there are things like the Montserrat learning lending library. There's, you can approach me and we can talk about it. I've put a lot of books on reserve so that you can access them. Putting that out and normalizing it for everyone. Again, often I think teachers try to look for hints about who needs the help. Just putting it out, because it makes the students who need the help, they'll follow up on it, and it's been said to everyone. Building interdependent learning into your classes so that students aren't stuck by themselves or are put in random groups frequently, so they're meeting other people in the class so they can expand who they know on campus, is a very important thing to be doing. Talking to them about how to use the scanner at the library to scan their books on reserve if they can't find another way to get those books is a really, and telling everyone at the same time, explaining what your office hours are, as I've mentioned before, putting resources on your syllabus, but rather than reading your syllabus the first week, which makes me crazy, frankly, when people do that to their students, but rather than reading them the syllabus in terms of academic things that are on there, they're clearly going to see those eventually. What they never look at are the supports that people list at the end of their syllabus. Spend time talking about supports on campus rather than we're going to do chapter 3 in 2 weeks, and then we're going to do chapter 4, and this is the date of your midterm. I don't think that really needs to happen the first week of class, when you could instead be pointing people towards things that could support them as individuals, and then talking about Connor's Family Learning Center and things like that, maybe the second week of classes when they've settled in a little bit. Don't assume that all students are going away for spring break. That seems like such a small thing, but it's not. Like, where's everybody going? Or between semesters, where are you all going? And you're trying to create a community in the classroom, and I understand that. And then people start sharing where they're going. And it's a pretty good bet that everyone that's not speaking is not going anywhere. So again, just remembering that and so you can do interdependent learning that has nothing to do with that, because you're dealing with the subject matter, but not focusing on people's ability to pay for things. And maybe find out which of your students, if you can, in casual conversation, have attended a summer program here at Boston College. Did anybody do anything, here this summer, or without getting into travel plans, try to figure out maybe who is a member of, might have been in OTE or might have been in BC First, and talk to them. It gives you another layer of information, especially if you kind of suspect maybe the student is struggling more than others. You can figure out how to talk about that in your office without pinpointing them. Notice when there are events that you think would be of interest to first gen students. We just finished first gen week here at BC. Everyone at Learning to Learn is still kind of reeling from that, but they were great events, all sorts of kinds of events. Maybe have a time in your class, even a short amount of time, where people are allowed to make announcements about what they are involved in, or, oh, I'm going to be in a play and I'm going to be doing this, or it's first gen week, or make it sort of a normal thing, or find out a way to mention things along those lines to all of your students, again, so everyone can contribute what they're interested in to the class. And this takes no more than 5 minutes. Let's see. Recent challenges have been COVID for everyone. And for first gen students, that meant that students who were home had uneven, let's put it that way, access to Wi-Fi, to privacy. They didn't have a room that they could be in by themselves. If students came from a school that that maybe was lacking some preparation for them. As we know, this past year, all the incoming students, I would say, have been remote, have not had all the support and all the academic rigor that they had in previous years. And all teachers here at BC are noticing that, I would say. And so maybe even more so for some first gen students as well. And so that's been very difficult. They also couldn't always, in the last year or so, if they were on campus last year, when they were ill, it was harder for them to get home if they had to recover. The option to recover at home for first gen students, low income students, is not always there. Oh, I'll just fly home, or not fly really. I'll drive home and recover at home, but it's not possible all the time. So these quick trips home are not a possibility for them. And I would say also that, in closing, it's a little sad way to close maybe, but every time there's a racial incident here at Boston College, it hits our students in just incomprehensible ways. It's just, they are completely flattened, and a lot of our students, as I said, live on the MLE floor. And a year or so ago, there were all these issues going on that particular floor. And even though BC was trying to reach out to them, various parts of BC were trying to reach out to them to support them, after a while, it's just so overwhelming to finally get here, to finally be at Boston College, to have all of the struggles I just mentioned, and then have these kinds of incidents happen, and then more people sort of descend trying to help. And pretty much the reaction to the students that I spoke with was just, I can't do this anymore. I just can't do this anymore. However, the teachers who would talk about these things in class were heroes to our students, that they would say and take some time and not pinpoint students to talk, which is not very good, but to just say, what's it been feeling like on campus for everybody in this room? Again, normalize it for everyone in this room, and give students a check-in time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. We all hear about these things. We are human beings. These things are going to continue to happen. And when faculty give small amounts of time for a forum to allow students to talk about it, it makes all the difference in the world to them. Clearly in office hours as well, but even more so when the class is asked as a whole to think about what's been going on and to voice how, excuse me, how they feel about it. So going forward, something will happen in the world that it would be great if people could give their students a little time to talk about in their classes. So that's what I have for today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Does anyone of the people who are participating have a question for Dacia or something to pick up? If not, yeah, Susan, you can you hear me?
Hi, yep, there we go.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, with all of the presentations that we've been given, it's been really helpful to find out, what each office does. Something that struck me, I started watching, I don't know if you guys have seen it, the Me You Can't See Apple TV series that Oprah Winfrey has put on. Well, she was discussing how, she started that school in South Africa first for girls, and how, when they all went there for education, how, they came from all these different religious backgrounds, different cultures, first time away from families. And they put support services for them in the school because they had a lot of trauma that these girls had to go through. And so Oprah in the series was talking about how, she was so impressed how girls had gotten scholarships. And so a lot of them, well, not a lot, but a few came to like Wellesley College.
Mhm.
And she was surprised to learn how much they were struggling. Like she thought, they were financially all set, they've got all this stuff, they've prepared them well. And then they came here and how the girls were struggling. I'm curious what mental health services are available for, the first gen students or even other students too. But when there is trauma involved that they are trying to deal with, is there some place they can go specifically for that?
That's a great question. It's interesting. I actually worked with some of her students one summer when they came to campus. This was years ago, and she would have them. She was working with Joy Moore, and Joy helped them come to BC. And I one summer, maybe two, I don't remember anymore, spent some time teaching that group sort of study skills that we teach in the Learning to Learn class, in the applications of learning theory class. And to answer your question, the support services that are offered are the support services for mental health are, in addition to university counseling services, which we have, and also utilizing people in the disability services office, including Caroline Davis, who does amazing work with students around certain kinds of accommodations around anxiety and mental health issues. And actually, there's a way to contact that office at Disability Services and fill out a support form for students that faculty are concerned about for any reason. In terms of, in addition to that, I think that at least in terms of Learning to Learn, and I can't speak for the other, for example, BAIC, I think it's not mental health services, but I think because all of our students and all of BAIC students, and sometimes they're in both offices, our students are using services in Montserrat and all of that, I feel as though staff members are the first level of check-in. And because they have to check in with us here, my students, my advisees at Learning to Learn check in numerous times a semester, and as do the students at BAIC. And they need to come in and check in with their advisor. And so I think those touch points help us figure out, so what would be a good plan for this student next, because they seem to need more than just me, for example. And then we sort of shuttle them over to people that we think would be good for them to work with. Sometimes it's campus ministry. It really depends on the situation for the student. And sometimes there's this group that I think you could get a lot from kind of advice, but when it comes down to mental health counseling that we can't handle, then we will walk people over to counseling services. We will walk people to disability services. We'll do whatever we need to do to get the student what they need. And that also includes students who might, I know you said mental health, but also students with disabilities. The idea that often our students haven't been tested at their high school, and they know people have said, you're kind of showing that you might have ADD, but there was never any testing at their high school for lower income students a lot of the time. So they'll come here and, we'll be talking about how they're doing academically, and they will say things, and I'll say, they'll say, and I'll ask them, has anyone ever told you? Yeah, people mention that to me. So walking them through how to get tested for learning disabilities and going to Connor's Family Learning Center and making an appointment with Dr. Duggan and get an initial screening. And then how do you get tested? And how does your insurance pay for that? And what if your insurance can't pay for that? So there's all sorts of things that students can't put together for themselves. How would you come to Boston College and be able to figure that out? Where are you going to put that on a help page? You know, so it's really important that, I guess I would also say that if you find that you faculty member has a student and that you know that they're associated some way with BAIC or Learning to Learn, or they've been to Montserrat, it would be a great thing to kind of say, have you asked them about help for this, or to contact someone in that office and say, this is the student, because every person at all of these offices knows their student list. We can figure out who in this office would be working with so-and-so who you're concerned about for this reason. And progress reports do go out to faculty about mid-semester, but often that's kind of late and you've noticed something before that. So a conversation with a student about, do you have any offices you work with here on campus that have been helpful to you? And just kind of ask those kind of generalized questions and get things moving so that all of us who do advising can reach out to our students and who we probably have a relationship with when faculty see things that we don't.
Dacia, I have a question. Interesting statistics you gave us in the stuff you had prepared for us. So there's about 1,000 of the 9,000 undergrads are probably first gen, somewhere in that neighborhood. Of those 1,000, what percentage over the course of 4 years do come to feel at home? In other words, don't leave feeling alienated, both from home and from school. And secondly, what is the difference? What happens to them that doesn't happen to other students who leave here 4 years later, still feeling this isn't quite right for me? So what factors happen to make those students, or are there students of those 1,000, are there students, any student to leave here after 4 years feeling, well, BC was the right choice, I feel at home at BC?
That's a great question. That's where that exit interview would come out, would be very interesting, and that BC does and ask people what their experience has been. You know, it's such a loaded question, because there are students that certainly make their way through BC, have friend groups, have support, have joined organizations that make them feel welcome, and that they can handle challenges, and that they are accepted in certain corners. And I think there's some of that for most of our students. Some students have bigger circles than others. And I have to say, the last couple years with the upheaval in the United States, whether it's political, I can't say political or racial, because I think that's hard to separate, isn't it? So political, racial, George Floyd, it doesn't take much to tip over a sense or remove a sense of well-being for our students. It just doesn't take much, because it's always tentative. I feel like it's not tentative when they're with their friend group or their organization that they've, Vietnamese Student Association, where they have this group and they feel supported. But with the upheaval, broadcast upheaval of the last number of years, when you're talking about mental health, Susan, I mean, it just bottomed out. And so, Mark, I think part of the answer would be, it depends on what the last year has been like. And we haven't had a real superb last year in a long time. And just knowing that if they feel more pressure than other students, they also feel the exclusion and the fear and feeling that their world can be tipped over in a second and a half. And then watching it replayed on TV. Kim, did you have your hand up?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dacia. Incredibly helpful overview, and my heart is just hurting to hear that kind of precarious sense of belonging. Ugh. One of the questions that I have, I really appreciate your comments about kind of normalizing struggle for students. I'm familiar with some of the belonging research that supports that. And one of the things that I always come up against when I'm thinking about doing that with students is the line between normalizing struggle and then like gaslighting students, right? So normalizing that everyone might experience the struggle, and then having a sense of someone saying like, no, a part of your identity that you think is relevant in this situation because of the way our structures and institutions are set up isn't actually right. Like this is something everyone experiences. And in my own thinking with instructors around this, I still haven't quite figured out the threading that needle well, right? And saying all of us are struggling. Also, it is disproportionate and inequitable in the ways that we might experience this. And I'm wondering if you've heard from students about things that have been particularly effective, if you in your own teaching experience have things that, or your work with students that feel like and more and more, I guess I feel like our students are more cognizant of structural modes of oppression and are more likely to have that kind of critical consciousness present when they're bringing it in. And so maybe more skeptical of some of those broad sweeping comments that speak to everyone, right? So I'm rambling now, but I'm just curious what your thoughts.
Well, that's a really great point. I don't think there are broad sweeping comments that apply to everybody. And I think we have to understand that and that it doesn't, there just aren't. I don't know one thing I could say to this group that would that I'm just looking at, right? And say, oh, well, this is true for all of us, right? I don't think I would ever do that. I think that I think one thing that faculty can do rather than overgeneralizing and say we all struggle is be specific with our struggles. And that's what I was trying to get at in terms of, this is my freshman year and I'm first gen and I was clueless about A, B, and C. That's not going to cover everybody in my room, right? Ever. And so, and I say, it depends on the situation. It depends if it's one-on-one. It depends on all sorts of things. But, sort of lower middle class, coming from Connecticut, never in a not wealthy part of Connecticut and never seeing, and had 3 Black families in the town. That's my story. What's your story? You know what I mean? And so you're not overgeneralizing. You're not saying all these people go in this basket, which is never a good thing. I don't want anybody telling me where my basket is. So, so all of that. And I think sometimes when you disclose certain things in class, then if students come to see you, they'll disclose more individually and you'll see the one-on-one do better. I guess that's what I would say.
Thank you. That invitation to pair it back to the hyper-specific vulnerability is really helpful. Thanks for that reframing.
Thanks, Kim. Bert.
Dacia, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm sorry I was late for it. I really like that you brought up spring break because I think that's a particular area that sometimes first gen and low income students feel the inequities on campus. And there's a couple of things that BC does really well, I think, that should be noted, especially compared to other universities. For instance, we keep our cafeterias open during spring break. Harvard had kept its cafeteria closed until 2015, until faculty put pressure on the school to keep them open for students who were there. Some schools, you have to pay a fee to be
Oh.
on campus during spring break. And so if you're not traveling or something, you have to, you have to do that. But in BC, as far as I know, you don't have to pay a fee in order to be here. But then the students that I come in contact with really it does matter a lot when faculty talk about spring break in class, like you've pointed out. I mean, that's sort of bringing it up and then having people sort of discuss it can really be an issue of feeling left out or feeling like, my plans are not as elaborate or expensive or enriching, maybe in some cases as my peers. And then also, it can just make them angry to hear about some of the things that their peers are doing. So I had a student in class once who talked about being on the Newton bus and hearing a fellow student complaining that she was unable to take her horse to London for spring break. And her father finally said, okay, we'll fly the horse to London for the week so that you will be, reunited with your horse. And, and even the price, she even talked about on the bus, the price was like $30,000 to get the horse from wherever in the East Coast to. So anyway, it's my question for you is, because you always have such good advice, I think, for faculty and staff. And I know so many students who've taken your course or courses in Learning to Learn, whether it's study skills or otherwise, and just benefited so much. What do you do about the things that aren't policies, right? That it's about peer-to-peer interactions that are difficult, painful, sometimes that cause people to lose faith or hope. Do you have anything that we could do as a university better, that we could even tell our people that we're in conversation with who are low income or first gen about how they handle those types of overheard conversations or just interactions with their peers?
Wow, that's a great question, Bert. And I feel bad for the horse. I mean, really? Horses are skittish anyway, and you're going to fly the horse over for a week. I mean, that was wrong from every direction. There was no direction that was good there. Yeah, peer-to-peer, and especially overheard, as you said. So it's not even someone that was being obnoxious. It was just, that's their life, and it's not your life. And it's never going to be your life. And the horse thing was problematic. So I feel as though, more students need conversation partners where they can go. That I feel that we need to make more of a push towards open times just for conversation about anything. I think faculty, and I know I'm saying, oh, now add, but maybe when you're explaining office hours, which we talked about earlier, Bert, but not in this way, to just say, when I put it on my syllabus, I said, you can come to talk to me. I write it on my syllabus. You can come to talk to me about an assignment, an exam, something that's going on in your life right now, something great that just happened to you, something you're really concerned about. Being the more specific on the syllabus, and I read that part out to them, that for me, this is what my office hours are for and what you can make an appointment for. And you don't need to apologize, and you don't need to make a case for wanting to talk. And, students will write to you and they'll say, well, I really would like to talk to you about, they like make a case for why you should allow them to speak with you. I mean, and it's crazy. It's just like, just come. And I say specifically all of those things on the syllabus and in class, and you have to repeat it frequently, because after the first week of class, everything is a blur. And then, and then they start to get nervous about something and they've forgotten everything you said about that. But I feel like also sending students that you feel, that you sense are feeling marginalized, to an upperclassman that like find another student that you already know, that you feel like, I have another student and I think you two would get along great. And it's always great to have a relationship with someone that's been around here longer. And I know when I used to teach Courage to Know, we had senior TAs in the course, and those TAs would rotate through my students and have these lunch dates with them individually and just be there as a resource, right? And I think sometimes we think as teachers or administrators, we need to take it all on, but there's only one of us. So who else can you pair these people with that you think this would be a good mesh? This would be a good mesh. Go to have coffee with this person and reach out to the older student, tell the younger student, and then reach out to the other student to say, and the older student is thrilled. They're thrilled. You know, they're very excited by the whole thing. And I do that with, we have undergraduate TAs for the Learning to Learn class. And sometimes they'll just be one of those TAs that I know should be talking to a student in my English class, not about the learning to learn skills, but about life. So I think we have those people and we forget about them sometimes. And when they come to see us, we're thrilled to talk to them, but we forget that they could actually be helping another student.
This has been so rich. I have a couple questions that are sort of burbling around for also. I mean, one of the things that seems to be a sub-theme in some of your classroom recommendations is also, seems to be things that also will hopefully raise the sensitivity of the students coming from a background of privilege. I think sometimes students coming from a background of privilege probably don't even know that they have that.
Oh,
I mean, you know, I'm listening to you, listen to Bert last time, and realizing that I personally am so far from a first gen experience. I'm fourth generation going to college at least. And, you know, how to even become conscious and sensitive to all of this and to help other students become conscious and sensitive to all of this seems to be also a piece of what Bert was asking.
mm-hmm.
So that the student whose horse is being sent to London doesn't need to be talking about it on the bus.
Right.
Just to start with. But so I think that that's a piece of also of how we build a community that is truly open to diversity and sensitive to diversity. Seems to be a piece of the whole thing. I'm wondering, listening to that and getting back to the spring break theme, whether there is a way for the kind of spring break trips that seem to be a very special part of the BC experience, especially the service trips, whether there's ways to help the students for whatever piece that they have to contribute towards that financially so that they can get to LH or whatever it is.
Yeah, there is. And I used to, God, this is scary. When I think back, I'm having flashbacks. For, I think it was, I don't know, 7 years, I helped run the Navajo service trip for BC. And there was fundraising that the students had to do. However, I think people running these trips generally this is one of the difficulties, is that students need to tell their stories 300 times to 300 people when they can't afford to do things. And so, for example, for 48 hours, very popular retreat, or, you know, any of the retreats at BC, if there's a service fee and you go and you speak to the person who's running the trip, and it could be a service trip as well, especially if you have to have an upfront $100 or something like that. And Montserrat's really good about that too. Montserrat provides funding for students that can't otherwise do things. So there's a place, but also I would say any of the retreats where money has to be put up, or service trips where personal money has to be put down first, students can go to the director of the trip and say, I don't have the $100 to start with, but I'll fundraise it. Or the coordinator might say, you don't need to put any extra up, and you just do the fundraising with everybody else, and we will find a way to pay for that. So that's very common. But then the student has to keep telling their story. And this is the beauty of Montserrat, frankly, that one student, with the funding that they provide for students, again, to feel more a part of the culture, if students come in as Montserrat students, they have people who know them that they can go to and say, well, I borrowed this book, I scanned this book, but I need to buy a book, or I need to borrow a book, or I need to use the food pantry at Montserrat, or, they can, or I need to go to the career center and use the career closet so that I can get some clothes so that I can go on a interview, right? So that is really the beauty of Montserrat, in terms of one-stop shopping and being able to fill all those gaps. But what is really difficult is the re-asking all the time. And I feel that if we can guide students to individuals that we think would be good matches for them, where they can tell that one person, all of these things, and they will follow through with them, I think it makes a huge difference. And in terms of what you said about peer-to-peer situations, I have a lot of flexibility in what I teach. I teach writing and literature. I can pick my readings. I can pick the authors. I can pick the student essays from this thing called Fresh Ink, which is a publication of writing from the first year writing program. I can pick essays that I think will have an impact on how people open their eyes and see that everyone's experience in the world is not the same. And I think that's true for a lot of classes. Not all. Calculus is not going to go that way, but it's true for a lot of classes. And I feel that when we pick things that we love to teach, I think we need to also keep that layer in mind and pick things that will encourage people to see different identities, different ways of looking at the world, different cultural experiences. If we're not doing that and we're picking, and I as an English teacher am picking this essay because I think it's really good on this thing, you can't do one thing or another. I think you always have to be thinking about this. I don't think it does any good just to think, oh, I like this work because I've always taught it, frankly. I think we need to think about, why are we teaching it? And is it bringing people closer together? And I think the last thing I would say is, I spend a lot of time with my students talking about self-compassion and doing readings on self-compassion. And I can squeeze that into the Learning to Learn class. Like, why aren't you doing well on that test? Well, let's look at how you talk to yourself before you go into that test. Right? So these things, these themes of, intersectionality, of a diverse world, of self-compassion, compassion for others, can be squeezed into so many classes that we teach. And yet we want the world to be like that, but it's hard to remember that we have a lot of choices as teachers in what we do with our students, how we speak to our students, and what they're reading, what we reward them for doing and reading. So
I think that our time is passed up. So I really want to thank you so deeply, Dacia, for enriching us. I think we could sit at your feet for another hour easily, and just learn and take this deeper, but we can't do that. And so we all now know who you are as a resource if we want to follow up further on this conversation. And again, thank you for this enriching, enlightening, deep discussion that is going to give all of us lots to think about and to grow with. Thank you.
thank you all.
Jason. Bye-bye, everybody.
Nice to see you.